My in-laws thought I was an illegal immigrant, never suspecting I owned the apartment complex they lived in. My husband's family never understood my work. To them, I was just a grimy Salvadoran bookkeeper running a covert drug ring. What they didn't know was that the lovely apartment they bragged about getting for $100 a month was actually mine. You see, I knew my husband, Daniel, would feel guilty if he found out how much money I was quietly saving for our future, so I kept it under wraps. I figured living close by would bring us closer and help us become a real family. But instead, it only got worse. The harassment started small. His mother accidentally tossed out my tax paperwork, claiming she thought it was trash. Probably fake anyway, she muttered as I retrieved them from the bin. His father left ICE deportation stats on the counter, key sections circled in red. Daniel tried to stick up for me, but they just pat his hand like he was brainwashed. I wasn't even Salvadoran. I was Nicaraguan. And back home, you don't talk back to your in-laws. But the more I kept my head down, the nastier it got. They'd whisper about me, as though I couldn't understand real English. Poor Daniel, his mother sighed over coffee. Stuck with the baby of one of those. They know exactly what they're doing. Get a white man to knock them up, then scream deportation. At dinner, whenever the news featured undocumented immigrants, they'd crank the volume and stare daggers at me. If I reached for seconds, his father would mutter, "In America, we earn our meals. We don't just leech." My jaw hurt from how tightly I clenched it. Just give it time, I kept telling myself. Then came Super Bowl night. I brought over a homemade chicken Alfredo and a massive charcuterie board, his parents' favorite. But when we walked in, they didn't even say thank you. His mother immediately dug into my coat pocket and pulled out my wallet. "You never know when someone might need to ID him," she told Daniel, while snapping photos of my license and work ID. I saw Daniel's eyes well up, and I gently rubbed the small of his back, our unspoken code for, "I love you, it's okay." Things were good for a short while after that. Daniel's dad and I cheered for the same teams, booed the same plays. His mom looked like she was in bliss from how much she loved the Alfredo. But on my way back from the bathroom, his dad cornered me, reeking whiskey. "I know your type, using my son for a green card, but I've got my eye on you, Pedro." My name is Raphael. He knew that. By then, I knew if I didn't walk away, I'd say or do something I'd regret. So I quietly began packing our things. Daniel was already slipping on his coat. That's when his father stood up, his face lit with victory. "We've had enough. We know you're illegal. The sneaking around, never mentioning family, you're hiding something." His mom nodded eagerly. "We've collected evidence. Daniel deserves better than a criminal foreigner." Then came a knock at the door. I assumed it was a neighbor or a friend. But standing there were 3 men in blue uniforms marked ICE. My heart sank. Daniel's parents rushed forward, practically glowing. "He's right there. That's him. We've got proof." I stood calmly and pulled out my wallet. "Officers, I'm Rafael Morales. I own this property." I showed them my ID and the property deed I always carried for emergencies. "These are my tenants. They're 3 months behind on rent, which I've overlooked because they're family." Daniel's mother went pale. His father stuttered. The ICE agents shook their heads, visibly annoyed. "Don't waste our time again," one snapped, before walking out. They tried to laugh it off. "Oh, just a big misunderstanding. We were being protective," she said, with a forced smile. "You understand, right?" Daniel just looked at me, his eyes wide with love and disbelief. But one thing was certain, neither of us was laughing. The next morning, I handed them a 30-day notice to vacate. Family or not, some lines don't get a second chance. They moved out within 2 weeks. Suddenly, they were a lot more respectful of the Salvadoran they had tried to break. Now they rent her a seat like she was grieving a death. Meanwhile, her parents had moved into a cramped unit on the far side of town, likely double-checking their locks and counting their spoons, paranoid about the immigrants they imagined lurking everywhere. But I hadn't realized just how boundless their hatred was until they turned Claire against me. The first sign came quietly, in the dark, when her phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Claire snatched it quickly,
angling the screen away. Her fingers flew across the keyboard before she slipped the phone back on the nightstand. "Work email," she mumbled when I asked, then turned over. 2 days later, I caught her hunched over our laptop in the kitchen. There were multiple browser tabs open, too many to pretend they were nothing. She slammed the lid shut as I walked in, but not before I glimpsed headlines about financial control and signs of abuse. My stomach twisted. That wasn't idle browsing. Her parents began scheduling Claire's prenatal appointments to conflict with my most critical meetings. The first was an accident. The second felt suspect. By the third, when Claire apologized and said she'd just go alone, I knew exactly who was pulling the strings. I rushed out of a presentation once just to catch her at the clinic. But when I arrived, it wasn't Claire alone, it was her parents, sitting on either side of her like sentinels, holding her hands. The nurse poked her head out. "Has the father arrived yet?" she asked. "He's too busy with work," her mother answered, loudly, while I stood 10 feet away. Then came the day her father happened to see me entering one of my rental properties. He described it in perfect detail to Claire later that evening, but called it a suspicious building downtown. Claire's hand instinctively shielded her belly as she asked me about it. I hesitated, wanting to surprise her with the future I was building, not spoil it with dollar signs and deeds. My silence only confirmed whatever story her parents had spun. She started drifting. At dinner, her eyes flicked to her phone constantly, sending quick replies to a group chat I was never invited into. When I asked, she said her parents needed a private space to process everything. But her refusal to meet my eyes told me it was more than that. They invited her over for lunch at their apartment, being sure to emphasize just how miserable they were now, how they were suffering because of me. They'd even framed the 30-day notice I'd served them, hung it in the hallway like a martyr's certificate. Claire came home teary-eyed and silent. One night, I woke up to find her side of the bed cold. I followed the glow of the laptop screen to the living room and found her comparing our relationship to bullet points from domestic abuse websites. She was writing notes, her fingers trembling as she typed "husband hides assets" into the search bar. My chest constricted. Her parents had infiltrated everything. They joined her book club, spreading quiet rumors among the members, echoing phrases I recognized from the very pamphlets Claire had been reading. Soon, her friends looked at me differently, suspicious, guarded. At her baby shower planning meeting, I saw her best friend, Danielle, pull her aside. "I just want to make sure you're okay," Danielle whispered, glancing at me. "Your parents, they're really worried." Claire's reply was too soft to hear, but the hug Danielle gave her afterward, that was the kind of embrace you give someone in crisis. Then came the gut punch. I noticed a strange withdrawal when I logged in to order nursery furniture. Tracking it down led me to a separate account, under Claire's name only. When I confronted her, she said it was just for emergencies, but we'd never kept our money separate, ever. Soon after, her parents volunteered at a charity event at Claire's work, charming everyone with their tearful tale of being thrown out by their cruel son-in-law. Within weeks, they were adored regulars around her office, while I got side-eyed at company mixers. Then her mother conveniently ran into Claire's OBGYN at the grocery store. By our next visit, the doctor was probing into our home dynamics and whether Claire felt safe. Another domino fell. Claire's childhood mentor, the woman she'd looked up to since she was a teen, started expressing concern. Her father had befriended the woman's husband at the gym, feeding him carefully tailored doubts about me, about secret money, about mystery. And then came the anonymous email. It hit her inbox on a Tuesday. It had every property I owned in the city, 12 of them, with tax records, purchase histories, dates. Claire printed the entire file and laid it out on the dining room table like courtroom evidence. When I walked in that evening, she was crying. I didn't lie. I told her the truth. I owned them all. I'd kept it private to avoid letting money poison what we had, and I wanted to surprise her with everything I was building for our future. But all she heard was secrecy, lies. Years of trust crumbled in a single evening. Then her phone pinged. A message from her parents. "We're here when you're ready. No judgment, just love." Claire grabbed her overnight bag and left for her friend's house. I woke up alone. Little signs of absence haunted every room. Her pregnancy books were now on the guest bed. Her grandmother's wedding ring sat cold on her nightstand. The ultrasound photo that had lived on my dresser, gone. Her parents' manipulation only escalated. They brought her to dinner with mutual friends in the middle of a nasty divorce, ones who'd just discovered financial betrayal. The stories were hand-picked, planted like traps. Even her brother, Max, neutral for so long, called me after Thanksgiving worried. "They said she's trapped, like you're controlling her." I tried showing her Claire bank records, every dollar accounted for, all earmarked for our baby. But through her parents' lens, it just looked like another leash. Even love was spun as abuse. They urged her to see a therapist, and of course, they already had one in mind, someone who specialized in cultural and financial abuse. I knew what was coming. Claire called me after her first session, voice trembling. "The therapist asked how long you've been hiding assets from me. Maybe we just need some time apart to figure this out." They'd found their final pawn, a professional to validate every poisonous doubt they'd sown. The ground beneath us collapsed. Claire began documenting every move I made. She texted her mom my comings and goings, used old family code words like blue sky morning, their signal that the plan was working. The final blow came a week later. A formal complaint landed on my desk from the city's property board. Her parents had filed it. Every broken light bulb, every temporary repair in the building they once lived in, they twisted it all into evidence of landlord neglect. They'd clearly been collecting notes for months. My property manager warned me that inspectors would be arriving unannounced. Then 3 days later, the local news aired a segment. "Landlord evicts elderly in-laws, speak out." The headline crawled across the screen as her parents sat on their sagging couch looking feeble and heartbroken. Her mother's hair, usually salon perfect, now showed gray at the roots. Her father, once robust, hunched over a cane I'd never seen before. The reporter never contacted me. The internet did what the internet does. Commenters demanded to know how someone like me, a suspicious foreigner, owned that much property. At Claire's work, they treated her like a wounded animal. Colleagues paused conversations when she walked in. Tissues appeared in her hands before she asked. And me? I just stood in the ruins, watching the life I built collapse. Under a narrative I never had a chance to control.
Pamphlets about women's shelter started appearing on Claire's desk. Human Resources scheduled a mandatory check-in meeting, citing concerns about her home life. That evening, Claire came home with a folder labeled Resources for Women in Difficult Relationships, placing it carefully on the coffee table, where I was guaranteed to see it. I found the recording device by accident. I was looking for my car keys when I felt something hard beneath the couch cushions. A small digital recorder, its red light still glowing. I pressed play. There it was, our full argument from the previous week, recorded in perfect clarity. Every word, every pause. The timestamp showed it had been forwarded to her parents' email just minutes after the recording ended. My hands shook. How many of our private conversations had they collected like evidence? The next blow came quietly. Claire's parents hired a divorce lawyer, one known for protecting women's financial interests. The retainer agreement had been sent directly to Claire's office, so I wouldn't see it first, but she left it on her dresser, in plain sight. Maybe she wanted me to know. Maybe she didn't care anymore. The letterhead advertised expertise in uncovering hidden assets and securing equitable outcomes. Her parents had already prepaid for 20 hours of consultation. One evening, Claire approached me with a document. It was a postnuptial agreement drafted by her parents' lawyer. Her hands trembled as she placed it in front of me. "This would just help me feel safe," she said softly. The agreement acknowledged my real estate holdings and guaranteed Claire a significant financial share in the event of divorce.
I stared at it. Not a legal safeguard, but a death certificate for the trust we once had. When I refused to sign, she left the room in tears. That night I overheard her texting her mother, "You were right. He won't even try to prove you wrong." Her parents rallied the extended family next. At a gathering I wasn't invited to, Claire's cousins swapped horror stories, each about a friend or a co-worker with a husband who turned out to be someone entirely different. The tales escalated with every telling: undisclosed deaths, mistresses in other cities, even children from secret affairs. Claire came home pale, shaken. She looked at me like a stranger who might crack open into something monstrous at any moment. Then my property manager resigned. 3 weeks of nonstop harassment from people calling themselves concerned citizens. Claire's parents had enlisted their retirement community to flood our office with complaints, accusing me of slumlord behavior and unsafe housing practices. My manager apologized as she quit, explaining that no other company in the area would risk working with me. Word had spread too far. Even planning the baby shower became a war zone. Her mother suggested it be women only, saying it would help Claire feel more comfortable, as if my presence was inherently threatening. The guest list ballooned to include every one of her parents' friends, while conveniently excluding mine. When I offered to help with the preparations, her mother replied through Claire that it would be inappropriate given the circumstances. Her go-to line when our mutual friends asked about us was, "I'm still figuring things out." It was vague enough to gather sympathy, but clear enough to push people toward a side. Those who knew us best tried to stay neutral, but in the twisted version of our story that her parents told, even neutrality was an act of betrayal. The GPS tracker turned up during a routine oil change. The mechanic held it out to me, magnetic, compact, with a blinking signal light. "Want me to take it off?" he asked. I recognized it immediately. Claire had ordered that exact model on Amazon a few weeks ago. When I asked her about it, she claimed it was for emergencies, just in case something ever happened to you. But her phone showed the tracker's app was connected to her parents' devices too. They had full access to my movements, where I went, how long I stayed, when I returned. They were building a case against me from every angle. Finally, her parents made the offer. They'd pay for Claire's divorce attorney in full, no strings attached. A gift of empowerment, they called it. Freedom, options, escape. Claire didn't deposit the check right away. It sat in her jewelry box for 2 days. When I found the deposit receipt, she just said, "It's not what you think. I just need to know I have a way out." And that money? It didn't just buy her options. It bought silence, and maybe eventually, an ending.
Escape routes became more appealing with each passing day. I came home from a property inspection to find the locks on our house changed. Through the living room window, I saw Claire inside with her parents. Her father was giving directions to a locksmith who was just finishing up. My key turned in the lock, useless now. Claire wouldn't meet my eyes through the glass. She kept her gaze fixed on a stack of documents spread across the dining table. Her father stood behind her like a sentry, one hand resting firmly on her shoulder. The nursery, the space we had lovingly built together, was being packed up under her parents' supervision. Every item I had bought or assembled was labeled and boxed. The crib I'd spent hours putting together now sat in pieces, leaning awkwardly against the wall. My contributions to our child's future were being erased, item by item. Claire moved like a sleepwalker, her voice quiet and distant as she nodded along to her mother's reorganization plans. The police arrived within 20 minutes of my knocking on the door. 2 officers reviewed the temporary protective order Claire had filed. The language was sharp, surgical, clearly the work of her parents' lawyer. Financial abuse, isolation from family, implied threats of deportation against her aging parents. It painted me as a manipulative, dangerous man. Claire stood in the doorway while the officers told me I needed to leave immediately. She didn't say a word. That night, her parents moved into our guest room, claiming Claire needed emotional support during this painful transition. Their things filled the spaces that had once been ours. Their voices echoed in the halls I used to call home. On social media, I watched the transformation unfold in real time.
Photos of healing family dinners filled my feed, always taken at our dining table, my chair noticeably absent. The hashtag Justice for Claire began to trend within days. Her mother's book club and her parents' retirement community shared posts warning of financially abusive husbands. Each share added new details to a growing myth: the young woman who had bravely escaped a secretive immigrant's control. Local advocacy groups rallied behind the story, not realizing they were playing roles in a masterfully directed campaign. My tenants began receiving letters that questioned the validity of their leases. The sender, our parents' lawyer, now claiming to be investigating property fraud. Tenants started calling, frightened and confused. I spent hours assuring them their housing was secure, providing documentation. But trust, once broken, isn't so easily restored. 3 families gave notice within the week. Claire's ultrasound photo surfaced on her mother's profile with the caption, "Praying this child grows up with a better father figure." Hundreds of comments followed: prayers, applause, sympathy. People who had once toasted our baby now cheered her decision to protect it. Every message felt like another stone on the grave of my name. My lawyer called with devastating news. Claire had filed for emergency custody before the baby was even born. The filing described our home as unstable and emotionally dangerous. My real estate holdings were recast as secretive manipulation. Her parents submitted affidavits claiming to have witnessed episodes of emotional control. The hearing took place in a sterile courtroom that smelled like disinfectant and dread. Claire sat flanked by her parents. Her father wore an American flag pin that glittered under the fluorescent lights as he leaned toward their attorney, murmuring about my immigration status. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with reading glasses and a stern jawline, had clearly reviewed every exhibit. Claire's lawyer described a pattern of secrecy and emotional domination, a man who hoarded wealth while isolating his wife from family. The temporary custody ruling shattered whatever hope I had left. Supervised visitation only after the baby's birth. Each visit to be held at a court-approved facility. Her parents were positioned as the consistent, stable caregivers. I was painted as the unpredictable outsider with a hidden fortune and unclear motives. The judge's remarks underscored a demonstrated pattern of withholding information and praised Claire's parents for stepping in during a time of crisis. A few days later, I got a call from the Latino Community Center where I'd volunteered for nearly a decade. They'd received an anonymous letter. It questioned whether someone under legal scrutiny for financial and emotional misconduct should be involved with vulnerable families. The board, people I had mentored and supported for years, scheduled an emergency review of my involvement.
The board I'd served alongside for years at the community center called an emergency meeting. They expressed deep regret, but explained that in order to protect the organization's reputation, they were placing me on temporary suspension from all volunteer activity. Claire changed the beneficiaries on her life insurance during what should have been a routine prenatal checkup. Her mother's bridge partner, an insurance agent, facilitated the paperwork. Suddenly, her parents were listed as primary beneficiaries, with a clause providing for our unborn child. I was named only as an overseer. Every signature felt like a thread snapping, another part of our once intertwined lives unraveling. Then I discovered her parents house hunting inside my own buildings. The new property management company I'd hired after my former manager resigned forwarded me an application made through an LLC. The offer was well above market rent. A little digging revealed the LLC was tied to one of her father's golfing friends. The intended tenants? Claire's parents. They were literally trying to move into what I'd built as they pushed me further out. Claire's brother, Julian, finally called me, his voice strained with guilt. He admitted their parents had threatened to cut him off from any inheritance if he kept in touch with me. "They said supporting you means turning against them," he murmured. He apologized, and then he hung up. Another bridge burned, another person lost to their campaign of isolation. Her father then hired a private investigator, someone from her golf club, of course. I noticed the same gray sedan parked near my properties, always idling nearby, camera lens glinting from the window. The photos later turned up in court, me unlocking doors, inspecting hallways, meeting contractors. every routine task twisted into suspicious behavior. Claire's prenatal class instructor pulled me aside after one of our sessions. "Some participants expressed discomfort with your presence," she said, hesitating. Her parents had reached out, raising concerns that I was stressing Claire out. The instructor gently suggested I consider attending a different class, or perhaps support from a distance. Another shared space now belonged to her alone. Then her mother posted a photo online, a close crop from our company holiday party 2 years ago. My glass of champagne, frozen mid-toast, was framed as evidence of a drinking problem. The timestamp had been altered to imply this was a common occurrence. The comments flooded in. "Poor Claire. So brave dealing with all this while pregnant. She deserves peace." People who had been at that party and knew the truth? Silent. No one wanted to get involved. And then the calls began. My family in Nicaragua, people who'd never even met Claire's parents, started receiving phone calls late at night. My mother phoned me in tears, asking why Claire's family had called to talk about my abuse. They used nicknames only Claire would know. Private jokes, childhood stories, moments meant only for us, twisted into proof that I was manipulative, dangerous. The confusion in my family's voices broke something in me. A few days later, a GoFundMe campaign appeared online. Claire's Support Fund, Escaping Financial Abuse. Her parents' fingerprints were all over it. The page told the story of a young pregnant woman trapped in a marriage with a wealthy, controlling husband. Donations poured in, thousands in just a few days. Money Claire didn't need, but that served a bigger purpose. It cemented her role as a public victim. The local newspaper picked up the story. A glowing profile titled "Grandparents Fight for Daughter's Freedom" ran with a full-page photo of their parents in their cramped apartment. Behind them, framed on the wall, hung the eviction notice I had served them months ago. The reporter never reached out to me for comment. The article exploded across community Facebook groups. Hundreds of comments praising her parents' courage. A few called for me to be investigated. And then Claire went into early labor. We had been in the middle of an argument about custody, about the lies, about everything that had been taken from me when it happened. The stress, the buildup, it broke something in her. She began contracting 6 weeks early. Her parents, who had been recording our conversation from the next room, immediately blamed me. They later submitted the edited audio in court, stripped of context, emphasizing only my raised voice. When we arrived at the hospital, security was waiting. Claire's parents had arrived first. They described me as a volatile ex-husband, a threat to the mother and child. Hospital staff had been warned in advance. By the time I was allowed in, I had almost missed my child's birth.
I sat at the hospital security desk while they verified my identity and connection to the patient. Only Claire's hesitant, fragile insistence got me into the delivery room. Her parents posted up outside like royal guards. Through the tiny window in the door, I saw them glued to their phones, typing, curating the moment, crafting the version of the story they wanted the world to see. They had already made social media accounts for the baby before she'd even taken a first breath. The birth certificate listed me as the father, but her parents insisted the surname be hyphenated to include Claire's maiden name. The first photo of our daughter excluded me completely. Claire cropped me out before sending it to the family group chat, the one I still didn't have access to. Her parents' response came within minutes. "Welcome, little one. We love you so much already." No mention of me. That image circulated online within hours, shaping the narrative of a brave single mother and devoted grandparents. They moved into Claire's house full-time to help with feedings, but their real role was gatekeeping. My requests for overnight visits were denied under the existing supervised visitation order. They coordinated their schedules specifically to limit my contact with my child. The nursery was now fully theirs. Everything I'd picked, every soft color, every stuffed animal, had been boxed and stacked in the garage. The baby fund I'd saved over the course of years was frozen during financial discovery. Claire's parents' lawyer had known exactly where to dig. What I saw as love and preparation, they labeled deception. The court-appointed financial analyst combed through every transfer and deposit, treating affection like manipulation. In mediation, Claire confessed she still loved me. But love isn't enough, she said, voice low, the words sounding too perfect, rehearsed. Her parents had redefined our entire relationship for her, translating every sacrifice into control, every kindness into coercion. The mediator, selected from her parents' lawyer's recommendation list, nodded with grave empathy. Then her parents proposed we sell the house. They said, it's time to start fresh. They already had a market analysis from a realtor friend. The sale would be fast, they assured, profitable. The home we built together, the place meant to hold bedtime stories and birthday candles, was reduced to a column on a balance sheet. Claire began touring apartments closer to her parents. She was building a new future, one that left no space for our past. Then the footage went missing. My security system, the one protecting the unit where her parents had harassed me, suffered a power outage. The electrician who responded? Her father's nephew. Months of recordings were corrupted. The backup systems failed at the same time. Years of evidence vanished in a single coincidence. Her parents joined the neighborhood watch soon after. They came to every meeting. They smiled. They waved. They quietly shared warnings about the absent father with questionable finances. Neighbors I knew for years began looking through me like I wasn't there, crossing the street to avoid awkwardness. The neighborhood, the one I had helped maintain and improve, turned cold. Then came Child Services. An anonymous report alleged my housing situation was unstable. The investigator casually mentioned she had gone to college with Claire's mother. She toured my properties, noting every half-finished repair. Suddenly, my real estate investments weren't signs of security, they were red flags. The report found no immediate threats, but the case remained open, another shadow hanging over my head. Claire later posted the first family photo online. My village, the caption read. She stood, holding our baby, in what used to be our living room. Her parents flanked her on either side. And behind them, in the window glass, my reflection, faint, unseen, a ghost hovering just outside the edges of their carefully curated life. The post drew hundreds of likes and comments. People praised Claire's strength, applauded her parents. The request I filed for increased visitation was denied. The judge cited the ongoing financial investigation and the need for a stable environment. Claire's living arrangement, with her parents present full-time, was deemed secure and consistent. Mine, despite the income, the space, the effort, was painted as uncertain. Each ruling pushed me further from the center of my child's world.
Across the pavement. They fluttered around our feet like confetti from a battle neither of us had won. The daycare Claire's parents chose wasn't near our house. It was walking distance from their apartment. When I attempted to add myself to the pickup list, the administrator checked the forms and gently told me my name wasn't listed anywhere. "If you can bring court documentation," she said quietly, "we can update the file." That evening, Claire's father took center stage at the local VFW hall. He told stories about protecting his family from infiltrators and domestic threats in disguise. His gaze lingered meaningfully on the Latino veterans in the room as he spoke about enemies hiding their true nature behind polished appearances and forged identities. No one said it outright. They didn't have to. Several men shifted in their seats, recognizing the message for what it was. Subtle, deliberate, poison. Then my mortgage lenders began receiving official inquiries questioning the validity of my loan paperwork. Claire's parents had contacted them separately, hinting at possible fraud in the original applications. The banks launched internal reviews. My accounts were flagged. Refinancing or pulling equity was suddenly impossible. Each process dragged on for weeks, forcing me to pay legal teams just to stay afloat. Meanwhile, 3 more tenants gave notice. Claire's parents had escalated their campaign,
stationing themselves outside my buildings during peak hours, whispering warnings about my legal issues. Within a month, my rental income dropped by 40%. Units that had been full for years now sat dark and silent. The first mediation session was supposed to be about compromise. Claire brought our daughter, dressed head to toe in clothing chosen by her parents. A note was pinned to the diaper bag in her mother's handwriting. Dressed by grandparents who care. The baby wore a bib that read, "My grandparents love me." It was a gift from the retirement community. Every detail had been staged to emphasize their constant presence and my supposed absence. While the mediator reviewed our financial statements, I watched my daughter reach for me from across the table. But the numbers told their version of the story. Claire's parents had compiled a thick folder of documentation, proof of their financial support throughout her pregnancy. Lined up beside my secretive savings and undisclosed accounts, it painted a clear contrast. They were the steady protectors. I was the man who hid things. The mediator's expression softened toward them with every page turned. Faced with the prospect of another drawn-out legal war, I agreed to the settlement. Claire would receive 70% of our shared assets. It felt like surrender. But then I looked at my child. It wasn't about winning anymore. The moment the ink dried, Claire's parents filed for grandparents' rights. They cited the very settlement I had just agreed to, arguing that any man who would give up that much must acknowledge his own unfitness. They submitted affidavits from nearly everyone in their social circle. One by one, people I barely knew swore they had witnessed troubling behavior. The Latino Business Association, where I'd been a loyal member for 15 years, voted to rescind my membership. The president called privately to apologize. His wife, he explained, had become close with Claire's mother through their local grocery store. He had to choose peace at home. I hung up. The community I'd helped build for over a decade was closing its doors behind me. Then Claire sent one last message. Just a single text. She said her parents' attorney advised her to cease direct contact. Anything she said could be used against her in court. After that, she blocked my number. Years of love, of marriage, of memories, reduced to third-party communication through lawyers. I wasn't invited to the baptism. I found out about it from a mutual friend who was surprised I hadn't been the one holding my baby at the font. Claire's parents had arranged the entire ceremony at their church, surrounded by their friends. Photos surfaced later. Her father stood beside the priest, beaming, arms cradling my child. He looked every bit the grandfather. And I, the father, was nowhere. When my next scheduled pickup arrived, I found her parents waiting in the driveway with body cameras strapped to their shirts. Her father's hand hovered over the record button like a cop waiting to read someone their rights. He narrated the transfer, timestamp and all, as if preparing evidence for trial. The baby started crying as soon as she felt the tension. Her father dropped the diaper bag mid-handoff. The contents scattered across the asphalt. Diapers, a half-empty bottle, my court-ordered substance test results.
The wind caught the test results, fluttering the pages across the driveway. The negative results, clearly visible, landed at the feet of a passing neighbor. Claire's father muttered an insincere apology while casually making sure everyone saw them. It was deliberate. The humiliation, the exposure, another incision in 1,000 tiny cuts designed to bleed me dry. They petitioned the court to further restrict my visitation, citing my erratic behavior during custody exchanges. They documented every sigh, every strained smile, every exhausted glance. Their lawyer submitted carefully selected footage, framing normal frustration as instability. Suddenly, being human was a liability. They presented a pattern of concern that only existed through the warped lens they provided. Then a hurricane swept through the region. Several of my properties sustained serious damage. But when I filed insurance claims, the adjusters hesitated. Each of them had received letters from Claire's parents' attorney, subtle warnings about pending ownership investigations. The doubts were enough to stall every payout. Repairs froze, tenants left, my losses mounted. Then came our daughter's first birthday party. My family had gathered. Balloons, food, hope. They had no idea what was coming. Just as we cut the cake, a process server stepped through the front gate. He handed me divorce papers in front of my mother, my siblings, and cousins. Claire's parents had orchestrated the timing. Maximum visibility, maximum shame. Claire filed criminal charges next. Financial fraud during marriage. The accusations were flimsy, but her parents had a longtime friend in the prosecutor's office, a friend who still owed them favors. Even a weak case would drag on for months, restricting my access to our child even more. Soon after, code enforcement began appearing at my buildings like clockwork. Inspectors found violations in places that had passed dozens of previous checks. One of them quietly apologized. I have no choice. Orders come from above. Fines racked up faster than I could respond. Each citation cataloged and copied straight into her parents' ever-growing file. Then a local news station aired an exposé on the housing crisis. They never named me, but every detail matched my situation. An anonymous landlord, accused of hiding wealth and exploiting tenants. Claire's parents had found another way to ruin me, without risking a defamation lawsuit. Claire's attorney then demanded I liquidate all my properties. Clean break, they said. They ignored taxes, market timing, everything. Her parents backed the proposal. This wasn't about fairness. They wanted me stripped of everything, financially, emotionally, and personally. Then came the ultimate insult. A shell company, later traced to Claire's father, submitted an offer on the building where all this had started, 30% below market value. The excuse? Complications from the ongoing legal entanglements. They wanted to take back the very space they'd used to dismantle my life. And then the moment that broke me. During a supervised visit, my daughter looked directly at Claire's father and called him Papa. He smiled softly, not surprised. It was planned. They'd been rehearsing it, training her to see him as the father figure while pushing me out of frame. I kept playing, pretending my soul hadn't just split open again, not flinching as the weight of betrayal settled into my chest. Then a petition began circulating through the Latino business district. It demanded I be removed from every community board and organization I'd helped support for years. Her parents had mobilized their connections one final time. People I'd helped, partnered with, mentored, now believed I was a threat. A man who'd hidden assets and terrorized his elderly in-laws. The final custody ruling came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Alternating weekends, still supervised. Claire's parents granted equal unsupervised time. The judge wrote glowingly about their stable presence in the child's life, and noted my consistent lack of transparency. Every lie they'd told had matured into legal fact. I stood outside the building I still technically owned, staring through the window. Inside, Claire's parents played with my daughter. The same apartment they'd once rented from me now housed their triumph. My daughter laughed at something her grandfather did. And I stood in the rain, no longer a part of the life I had built. Just the ghost in the window.